So, how we doing?
Fabulous.
We are going to have a little exam next week. Wednesday of next week. Development, motivation and emotion, and perception. Those will be the areas on the exam. We are going to finish motivation and emotion. Today we started it last time, just very briefly. Today, then we'll be on to perception. I thought we might get a little farther along in perception than I was able to get in other classes. So
Is it actually chapter 5?
I don't know.
That's
What does
perception.
chapter 5 say?
It says perceiving the world, perception and objectivity.
I thought it was, is it sensation and perception or perceiving?
I'm not sure. I started reading chapter 4 the other day and then we said no.
Let me see, which one do you have? Do you have the
have
12?
the-
Oh, let me see this one. Yeah, then it's chapter 5, Perceiving the World.
Okay.
Because in the 13th edition, they changed it.
Alright, so chapter 10, chapter 5, and chapter 3 are what our test is on.
Yeah, development, which is, I guess, what is it, chapter 3? 3, yeah. Chapter 3, which is development. Chapter 4 is sensation and perception. Oh, okay, this is 13th edition. Chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 10.
But for 12th edition, it's 3, 5, and 10, right? Is that what we decided?
Yeah, we're going on, okay, here's how we do this. I don't think I have my syllabus with me, right? On the syllabus, that you have the topics, and across from the topic, you have the chapter. I don't have all the chapters memorized, right? But, so in this particular edition, it's development, motivation and emotion in the 12th edition, and perception, or perceiving the world, whatever it says. Yes, that's what it is. Okay, in the 12th edition. And material in that edition, in those areas is the same. We're going over motivation and emotion today. What we did last time, we talked about Kohlberg. So we went over Kohlberg's levels. Remember, Kohlberg looks at the relationship between abstract thinking and moral reasoning. That is Kohlberg's question, right? Are they related? Based on his research, he contends that they are. That the ability to think abstractly and the ability to think morally are connected. The greater the capacity for abstract thought, the greater the capacity for moral reasoning. That's basically what Kohlberg maintains. Right? Erikson, 8 psychosocial stages. You don't have to memorize the stages. But you do have to know that Erikson, right, for each of the stages, identifies what he feels is the primary psychological issue or issues facing the individual in that particular stage. Remember, he focuses extensively on identity, identity development, identity formation. Those are the things you need to be aware of with Erikson. The search for self, identity formation plays into healthy personality development. Kubler-Ross was grieving and loss. Again, you just need to know that the stages that she identifies are part of a grieving, for human beings.
although she initially identifies them working with terminally ill people, they pertain to all loss in life, loss of something that is significant. All right, and then I mentioned a few things about some childhood problems, ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities. Remember, there is no specific physical test, no brain scan, no blood test. These are things that are evaluated or assessed based on behaviors, characteristics of the individual. Autism, we mentioned briefly, some things about autism, and remember that autism is the largest or fastest growing developmental disability in the United States. Okay, just some of the things we talked about last time. And last time, we started talking about motivation. We said the term motivation literally means to move, right? What gets a human being to act? There are three types of motives that psychologists generally talk about, right? And in this 13th edition of the book, in the 12th edition of the book, they go by primary, secondary, and stimulus. But in the 13th edition, they call primary motives biological motives. So these are primary motives. Biological motives that are tied up with survival. Then we've got learned motives, secondary. Right? They're acquired, so they're not given at birth. They're not biologically given. And then third, stimulus. Stimulation motives. Okay, three categories of motives that we mentioned last time. Now, one of the things the textbook does is the textbook starts looking at each of these things in some detail. What's a primary motive? What's a biological motive? What's a learned motive? What's a stimulus motive? And one of the things textbook does talks about hunger and the hypothalamus. We already spoke about the hypothalamus playing a role in hunger. The other thing the textbook does in this area is it talks about anorexia. Now, anorexia, I've done a number of reviews of this book because the publisher asked me to review it and comment on it, and I've asked them to remove, or apparently they don't like that suggestion because they don't remove it. Right? Anorexia should not really be in this area. It's not something that we could talk about the way we talk about other parts of human motivation or what's involved in human motivation. Anorexia is a very serious psychological issue, right, which, if you don't confront the underlying psychological components that are driving this thing, the upshot of this can be death because of the self-starvation and consequently the lack of nutritional support for the body. Most anorexics, if they do die, they die from cardiopulmonary failure, the heart and lungs. Right? Do not have the nutritional support to keep going. Right? And so the heart literally just starts shutting down. The body starts shutting down. There's a number of bodily functions that shut down, but the heart and pulmonary system, right, they shut down. That's it. It's done. And the usual scenario with anorexics, right, if they are hospitalized, if you don't get to the underlying psychological issues that are driving this thing, you're not going to get the individual over the anorexia because another hospitalization will follow and another hospitalization will follow that. And that's very typical of what happens with anorexics. They go through repeated hospitalizations, right, where they're fed or forced fed, or they conform for a while, they're released, and they go right back to doing what they are doing, right, or were doing, right, that led to the hospitalization in the first place. There are now some places in the United States that actually specialize in the treatment of anorexia. And remember, anorexia didn't exist 50 years ago. It did not. It wasn't around.
Bulimia was, though. Bulimia has been recorded throughout history in other cultures, perhaps, right?
I don't know about bulimia. I don't know if bulimia has been recorded in other cultures. I don't know that to be a fact.
They would eat and eat and eat and then purposefully vomit so they could keep imbibing the Bacchanalian feast crap.
Yeah, but if they did it in Rome, if that's the case, that was only, to consume.
So it's not considered
That
an
was
eating
only
disorder
consumed.
without
The
the
eating disorder
psychological
component,
factor?
the psychological factor is the
There's
part
something
that
pretty
keeps.
screwed up with the culture that does
Huh?
that, though. There's something pretty screwed up with the
Yeah.
culture
Yeah,
psychologically that does that.
The psychological feature. If we talk about anorexia, if we did want to try and stretch it to motivation, let's just say hypothetically, right, which it really isn't, what would be the motive? Weight loss?
Social, like acceptance?
Well, that's ultimately what the underlying motive really is. But what would the motive be? Would it be weight loss? Because if you think that it's weight loss, how much weight loss would be enough? When does the anorexic ever get to a point where they think it's enough? Never. They don't get there.
Master control.
Control is one of the parts of anorexia. Right? But why doesn't the anorexic ever get to the point, and by the way, most anorexics are women. Very few anorexics are men. Only about 5 to 10% of all anorexics are males. Most are female. We'll come back to that. Most are women. But why doesn't the anorexic ever get to a place where she is, right, satisfied with her physical body? Yes?
Don't they see themselves as like different than what they actually are?
Yes.
They see themselves as-
Yeah. There is a grossly distorted sense of their own physical body. They don't see themselves in any reality-based fashion. So if we take someone who's anorexic and emaciated, and let's say we put this person in front of a mirror and we say, okay, I want you to describe your physical body to me. All right? You're going to look in the mirror, and I'm going to look in the mirror with you. All right? This woman, right, is going to describe herself as much larger than she actually is. Right? She may be emaciated. She may not have the strength to even get through the day, not enough energy to get through the day. And anorexics get hungry. They're hungry. They think about food a lot, but they don't want to eat. They do not want to eat. Right? So why is it that when she looks at herself in the mirror, right, or even thinks about herself, she doesn't see herself as she is? She sees herself differently. Why is that the case? Why would you think? Why do you think that would be the case? What would it tell us if a person doesn't see themselves as they actually are? Let's just talk about the physical form for a moment. Yes?
They're creating their own perception of themselves.
Yeah. Why? Why would we think? Why is that likely to happen?
Motivate themselves.
Well, when she looks at, right, when an anorexic describes herself and describes herself as much larger than what she is, what is that telling us about what she sees?
Distorted. It's not real.
It's distorted, but when she looks, does she like what she sees?
No.
No, she doesn't like what she sees. Why doesn't she like what she sees?
She's comparing herself.
Huh?
She's comparing herself.
Well, she ultimately does compare herself. We'll get to that in a moment. But why doesn't she like what she sees? She looks at herself and she says, oh no, not good enough, not enough, right?
Well, why doesn't anybody like what they say? They don't feel like they're good enough.
They don't feel, right? She doesn't like herself. That's why she never gets to a place where she can look and say, okay, that's good, right? I've taken off 5 pounds. That's good. That's not what anorexia is. Not at all. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Yes?
Wouldn't eating disorders be most closely related to addiction disorders?
They can be. They can be. They can be addictions. They,
Because I know they're treated a lot like how an addiction would be treated.
they can be addictions, and they become addictions. But anyway, so she's got a very poor self-image. She really doesn't like herself, which is why when she looks at herself, she doesn't like what she sees. And she never gets to a place where she likes what she sees. Right? So if she doesn't like herself, if she doesn't like what she sees, what does she think other people are going to think?
Same thing.
Same thing. Exactly the same thing. What's the anorexic want? Well, right? The anorexic wants what people want in general. She would like to be loved. She would like to be admired. She would like to be appreciated. She would like to be accepted. Right? She would like people to think well of her. Right? Now, you take this particular psychological profile, right, and you connect it to the cultural concept of beauty. What's the cultural concept of beauty for females? The cultural concept of beauty for females, is to be very slender. Right? And the way beauty is portrayed in the media, you have a slender female, right? And a slender female, right, has no problems in the whole universe, right? Everything is right there for her, right in front of her, right? People admire her, they like her, her life is all in order, nothing ever goes wrong, right? It's just like, right? It's a fantasy, it's a fairy tale. But you take this psychological profile and you put it together now with the cultural concept of beauty, right? And you got a combination, right, of things that can turn out to be, very threatening, life-threatening even. But those are the things that literally get merged in the mind of the anorexic. Right? It has to do with our culture, and many psychologists have dealt with this issue of, anorexia, cultural concepts of beauty, and the concept of femininity, women, right? Why it mostly affects women. We'll get to men in just a little bit. The other issue that goes along with anorexia, anorexics usually come from particular families, usually have a particular type of background where they don't feel appreciated or recognized. And if they in some way feel undervalued, unappreciated, unrecognized, once a person starts starving herself, right, they gain attention very quickly from other family members. So the anorexia can, in fact, become a source of control. It can become a source of control of others and can actually become a weapon that's used against others, family members, but it can also be a source of control that's directed at the self. Here's a person who doesn't feel that she can control the reactions of other people or of other people toward her. Now she establishes a sense of control in her life, right? With food and with eating. Now when we look at this, if we look at this profile like this, right? Poor psychological image, right? Poor self-image, right? Person who doesn't like himself, a distorted sense of one's physical body. That particular psychological profile is not gender specific. That doesn't only go with women. Males can have exactly that psychological profile. And do. How come we don't see more male anorexics?
Men don't want to be smaller, they want to be bigger.
Well, this is a great example of the messages that are given to males and females. What we tell a female to do, to be loved, to be appreciated, to be noticed, and what we tell a male to do, to be recognized and appreciated, are they the same things?
They're opposites.
They're not the same at all. What do we tell a male to do to be known? Right? Culturally, right? What would a male do? What is a male more likely to do to achieve, some sort of status or recognition or approval or yes?
Like working out and exercising.
Working out and exercising? That's one thing. Yes? Yeah, they'll use steroids. What are you going to say something? Okay. But males, right? Status, money, right? Material acquisitions. These are things that very much go with male status. Right? Males usually adopt behaviors that are more outward or more aggressive, right? Directed outward in a more aggressive fashion, because that's what the culture expects. So the anorexia, in many ways, is a great example of how you take a particular psychological profile, and there are a number of examples like this. Because, again, this psychological profile is not new. What's new is the anorexia, because of the messages we give people. How do people express what they feel? They usually express what they feel through some culturally approved channel. How the culture allows it to be expressed. During different cultural periods, we saw this type of, these underlying feelings expressed differently, materializing or manifesting themselves in different ways. Now, right, it manifests itself like this, which is why anorexia is a relatively new problem, because concepts of beauty change. And, right, the role of the media here in promoting the concept of beauty for women, nowhere in the period before us have we had such undue media bombarding us with images. Okay. So that's just a little bit, anorexia. Anorexia just is not something that we can easily put into the category of motivation. You have to look at anorexia differently. Then you would look at other things that people might strive for, might set goals for. Every single chapter on motivation in every introductory psychology text talks about the work of Abraham Maslow. Every single one. And this one is no different. So, who was Maslow? And what is he best noted for?
His hierarchy.
His hierarchy of needs. Maslow is best noted for his hierarchy of needs. That is most often what we equate with Maslow. Now, Maslow died in 1970, but he's a highly regarded figure in psychology. Now, when Maslow was beginning in psychology, he was getting his doctorate in psychology back in the 1930s. So Maslow's coming into psychology. At that time, the primary preoccupation with psychology was better understanding of abnormal behavior and treatment of abnormal behavior. That was the primary focus of psychology, and is still one of the most primary areas in psychology. But in the 30s, that was very much the thrust of psychology. So here's Maslow. He's getting involved in psychology, and he says, look at this. Here's this discipline of psychology. It deals primarily with pathology. Nowhere does it deal with what makes people aspire, what makes people creative, what makes people strive to do great things. Psychology is not dealing with that. So Maslow sees this as a deficiency in psychology. So he decides that he's going to find a way to fill this void. So what he does is he begins to identify prominent people in different areas. In science, in literature, in music, in the arts, in politics. He identifies prominent people in various areas, and he starts to collect information on them. The information that he collects becomes his need hierarchy. And he represents this need hierarchy in the form of a pyramid. As far as Maslow is concerned, the best way to maximize human potential is to recognize the needs that he identifies and to satisfy these needs in order to move the individual toward the expression of his or her full potential as a human being. That's basically what Maslow is talking about. And right, these are steps, right? Steps or parts, right? Stages in moving toward right, the realization of one's complete potential. And that's what Maslow was talking about, human potential. What's at the lower end? Bottom. What's the first one?
Air.
Huh?
You need to have air.
What is it?
Your basic need.
Yeah.
Air, food.
Physiological needs. Right? Physiological needs. Physiological needs that are tied up with survival. Basically like these, right? These biological motives. What's the second one?
Safety and security.
Safety and security. Now, what Maslow means by safety, he means a number of things, actually. First, there's safety from the physical environment, to be safe, right, to be physically protected. But he also means, by safety, some sort of order and predictability. Right? The fact that you know you will be able to maintain your life, support yourself, be safe from the physical environment. These first two levels, Maslow equates with lower order needs. Right? They're lower order. Now, these first two levels very much go with this first one. Right? Biological motives or primary motives, right here. This one. Right? Because they're lower order. Maslow maintained that these first, right, these lower order needs first have to be satisfied before people can go any further. Because if you're starving to death, right, or if you lack adequate shelter, that's going to become your primary focus in life. And you're never going to be able to focus on anything beyond that. That will consume you as a human being. What's this next one?
Love and belonging.
Love and belongingness needs. Right? Our fundamental needs for affiliation, for support, for recognition, for approval that we get, right, initially from our families. Then we can move on to, what's next? What's next? Self-esteem. Once we are now here, at this level, self-esteem, we're right at the doorstep of, what's next?
Self-actualization.
Self-actualization. It's Maslow's fundamental belief that the best way to self-actualize was to move up this hierarchy, right? To satisfy these needs. Satisfying these needs, right, cultivates movement up toward self-actualization. And that was the best way to get individuals to move toward the full realization of their potential. Is that accurate?
It's not wrong.
How do human beings achieve potential? Their greatest potential? Do we get to realize our greatest potential as human beings by having our needs met? Or might we get to realize our greatest potential as human beings from facing challenges, obstacles, and even being somewhat disenchanted with the world around us? And through overcoming obstacles, through facing the biggest challenges presented to us in life, is that the way individuals might actually overcome not only the limitations that they face, but recognize something greater or something more about themselves? Well, it's a question. It's a question that many psychologists have raised. Now, Maslow is a highly regarded figure in psychology. Why is he so highly regarded? Because who in the 1930s and 40s in psychology was talking about human potential or self-actualization? Nobody was talking about that in the 40s. And along comes Abraham Maslow. Right? So here's psychology, primarily concerned with pathology and clinical applications. Right? And Maslow comes along. Maslow starts talking about human potential, right? Self-growth, and self-actualization. He opens a door for a new part, a new way of thinking about people, because psychology wasn't there. And if you know anything about Maslow, does anyone know anything about him? Have examined him somewhere else?
Yeah.
In another course?
No, for my old job.
Right? But if you know anything about Maslow, he spent his entire life doing this. Right? Human motivation, self-actualization, characteristics of self-actualizers, right? How to instill values in people in order to get them moving towards self-actualization. I mean, he spent his whole life, everything he wrote, everything he did, focused on human potential and self-actualization. Right? Now, so he's highly revered and highly regarded because of where he ultimately begins to take psychology. But is it the best possible way to talk about maximizing human potential? It's certainly great when we want to talk about healthy human beings, no doubt about it. But how do we grow? What is the best way to facilitate growth in human beings? Does growth materialize as a result of challenges, or does growth materialize best when all of our needs are satisfied? It's an interesting question to ask, and a whole bunch of psychologists have asked that very question in looking at Maslow, as well as some other things. I don't want to, about Maslow and Maslow's research and Maslow's work. Nevertheless, he remains a highly revered, highly regarded figure in psychology. Okay, what's an emotion? What is emotion?
An example of emotion?
No, not an example.
Feeling? Is it expression of feeling?
It's an expression. Of what?
An
Huh.
expression of what? Get what you said?
Yeah.
Is
Or
it,
a definition. Go ahead. Do you have the definition?
is it a feeling?
It's a
An
feeling. An
expression?
emotion is a feeling. right? Where is the feeling? Where is the feeling, anyway, in an emotion? In your mind? In your body? Both? It's both.
Starts.
It's both, right? It's both. An emotion is both a mental event, but it's also a physical event. Brought on by changing sensations, right? Physical sensations. A state of mind, a state of being, right? And a state of physical sensations. What's the relationship between mental events and physical events? Can somebody die from fright?
Yes.
Is it possible to be frightened to death?
Do you have a heart attack or a stroke?
People have died like not hitting, like when they fall off a building, they've died before they hit the ground.
They die before they hit the ground. Many do. That's absolutely correct. Why?
I couldn't tell you that. I can only tell you one.
Dying from fright, and it's not specifically a heart attack. As a matter of fact, in most cases, it's not a heart attack at all. Well, the shock, right?
I think it's shock, yeah, it slowly shuts down these like,
What?
your body, when it goes into shock, it shuts down these like.
Well, not exactly.
Does your heart just stop? Just kind of a heart attack?
How does it stop? It stops.
It's a signal to the brain.
Like how?
Would it have anything to do with your body's response, like to adrenaline, or
Would it?
Isn't it an overload of adrenaline? OD.
would it cause your heart to beat like out of rhythm? I don't remember what it's called, but
Or regular?
Yeah, both of you have. No, it's not an arrhythmia. Right? You're not dying from the arrhythmia. People can die from arrhythmia, but that's not what seems to do it here. Death from fear is possible. It's called sudden death. Now, if we do see death from fear, first of all, where is it most likely to occur? Just somebody walking down the street?
Stressful situation?
Well, there are plenty of stressful situations that don't kill people. Where are we most likely to see death as a result of fear? What type of situation? What type of situation do you think would be
Life event.
very provocative? Yes?
Extremely traumatic experience.
Very traumatic.
Long branches and
Well, let's stay with the traumatic just for a moment. Traumatic and life and death. Where do we see traumatic and life and death all in one? Huh?
situations with guns,
Yeah. Like what?
like a robbery.
War. War is where we see it the most. Combat. When we see death from fear, the most, right, the situation that prevails in causing death from fear is combat, actually. Because there is nothing in life that is as terrifying as being in a combat situation, right, repeatedly for individuals. And it fills individuals, right, or some individuals. Generally, I mean, when you talk to combat veterans, most of them, if they're honest, will tell you that they're scared out of their minds. But people react to fear differently.
I've never heard that before.
What, combat veterans?
I was over there for 15 months, got combat every single day. And
Yeah.
never heard any of my friends ever, or even any of my leadership, ever say death from fear. Just kind of was weird.
Well, death from fear, I thought you.
It's like it's right, you know what I mean, over there.
Well, that's where we see it the most. That is where we see it the most, in combat situations. Now, it can happen in non-combat situations, but the trauma associated with the frightening event has to be something that's that dramatic. It's not going to be just ordinary fear, because people get frightened in life. That doesn't mean they die. And it's got to be something that is that traumatic. Now, if we take fear, what happens with a frightening situation? What does fear do?
Probably should act or reaction.
No. Well, fear stimulates what? Fear is mental, okay? Fear is a mental event. It's psychological. So here's the psychological piece, the fear. What happens in the body?
It releases adrenaline,
And that release of adrenaline is part of what type of reaction?
fight or flight.
Yes, it's autonomic nervous system activity. Fear triggers autonomic activity, or autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system, remember, two parts. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. Two parts. Right? So the fear is mental. The resulting physiological component is activation of the autonomic nervous system. The intensity of the fear, if you're talking about intense fear at this level, it can trigger an overreaction of the autonomic nervous system, which is really what's happening with sudden death. A complete overreaction of the autonomic nervous system. So, this, right, fear, the first part of us to react is the sympathetic component. That's the fight or flight mechanism. Right? Heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, right? Perspiration. Right? There's a whole series of mechanisms involved. That's the fight or flight. That's the mobilization. Because this system overreacts, what happens to the parasympathetic system? This system overreacts. So what happens to the parasympathetic system? It also overreacts. And the parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to what?
Return us to normal.
Slow things down. Heart rate, blood pressure, supposed to return things to a homeostatic state, balance. A parasympathetic system that overreacts does what? Does it give the person a heart attack? It stops the heart. It shuts the heart down. Because it's overreacting. It's supposed to slow the heart down, but it actually shuts the heart down. It's not a broken artery. It's not a heart attack. And what's it called? What's that called?
Cardiac arrest.
No. Parasympathetic
Rebound.
rebound. But it's happening, see, the parasympathetic rebound, it's an overreaction of the entire autonomic nervous system. Now, it's not a malfunctioning autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is actually functioning as a result of what is given here, mentally, psychologically. This works in conjunction with this. It doesn't work independently of this. This works in conjunction with this. And so whatever this is given, right, by the psyche is how the autonomic system is activated. That's what happens. That's parasympathetic rebound. Now, again, you can see it in non-combat situations, but we see it most often in combat. That is where we see it the most. I wouldn't think that people would talk about fear.
Well, I figure like something happens and then they get shot or something, so you see them dead from getting shot. But maybe they died before from, right? But I just never heard of that before this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's where we see it the most. That's where we see it the most. Yeah, and the nature of the trauma of combat is why many combat veterans, right, come back with some residual effect. Because it's difficult to internalize.
What's a lie detector test? What does it do?
Measures your pulse.
Measures heart rate,
Blood pressure.
blood pressure, breathing, respiration. What else?
GSR.
GSR. Can you say what that is? Do you know what that is? You're correct.
The galvanic.
Galvanic skin response. Yes. Do you know what that is? Do you know what that means? You're absolutely correct. Huh?
No.
Sweat. It's perspiration. So if we're talking about heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and perspiration, what are we talking about?
Lying.
Hmm?
It's your body's reaction, your mind's reaction to a question that you're asked.
Yes. But those particular reactions, heart rate, blood pressure, perspiration, and respiration, they're part of what?
Fear responses.
Huh?
Fear responses.
Yeah. And fear response goes with autonomic nervous system activity. A lie detector is actually measuring your autonomic nervous system response. That's what a lie detector is doing. All those things that we just identified, they're all part of your autonomic nervous system. And remember, autonomic is automatic. It means it happens automatically, outside conscious control. Your autonomic nervous system is activated by fear. It's also activated by threat. It's also activated by challenges, right? Being in a very unpleasant, uncomfortable situation. Right? Those are things that activate autonomic nervous system activity. Let's say you're out in the car driving. You're on the Northway, let's say on a Saturday morning. It's a beautiful day out. You're driving on the Northway. There's no cars on the road. You're thinking about how nice it is, right? What a nice day it is. How nice it is to be out here driving. And all of a sudden, in your rearview mirror, you see red flashing lights. Your body change?
You get nervous.
Your body change? Huh?
You get stiff.
Right? Heart rate, blood pressure, those things change?
Yes, they increase.
Yeah, they change. How long does it take for that change to happen?
Just kind of snap to
It's like instant, right? You see it, and it's like instantaneous. That's your autonomic nervous system. It reacts, right? Reacts to threat, reacts to danger, right? It reacts immediately to what we give it. Once I see it, right, the physiological response follows. See, what a lie detector is doing, a lie detector is interested in, obviously, something in here. Lie detector wants to know something at this level. But there's no way we can look in there directly. I can't just look in there and see. So what the lie detector is trying to do is trying to get at this by looking at this. By looking at autonomic nervous system activity as a clue to what might be going on over here. Because when people lie, right, that's anxious, right? That's threatening. That's challenging for individuals. So the autonomic nervous system reacts. Now, invariably, there's probably people sitting here saying, my autonomic nervous system, it doesn't react.